So can I ask you to pose that question again?
When you are doing your work, some of the things that you do is to cut ties either from entities or spirit attachments. You encourage them to move away, or control boxes or contracts from past lives, etc. You cut them. Does your client report feeling something at the time, at the actual time these activities are taking place?
Some do, yes. Some are very, very specific. They get back to us perhaps the day after. What I tend to do is the day after we perform the intervention, like these interventions we've worked on today, I will send the client a report tomorrow, right? So they'll get the report, say, 24 hours after the intervention's been done. And very often I'll get a client come back and say, can you tell me what time you did that? Because they want to check to see if it correlates with what they experienced the day before. So it's deliberately done in that way so that I can get a feedback if it's if it's made a significant impact. So yeah, clients do report immediate results often, not always, but often.
I think a lot of it depends if like how sensitive they are, and obviously how much control there is. So if you've got like really bad things with you that are putting thoughts in your mind and that kind of thing, it suddenly stops. A bit like we did with the soldier, when those voices and those things immediately stop, they notice that immediately, and then obviously they're aware of that. But I've found other clients of mine, some don't notice anything at all until they wake up the next day and they just feel different. So it's more of a feeling than a kind of perception that something's changed particularly. So I think it's just down to how sensitive somebody is, really. Yeah. And of course, most people aren't expecting to get better. Certainly for the clients that I deal with personally, most come to me as a last resort and they're not really expecting anything to happen anyway. Sure. So it's kind of almost as though they've given up. So, it's not really down to the fact that, they're expecting things to happen at a certain point in time, which is good in a way, because obviously if they expect nothing to happen, then it does. It's a better result.
Well, it surprises them, doesn't it? And they're really chuffed and grateful and thankful that it has made a difference. Yeah.
There was another thing that occurred to me earlier on in the conversation, particularly about two of the clients, and that was that I fully understand the distinction that you make between a problem that is spiritually based, and by that I assume you mean something to do with the spirit world, rather than religion or whatever. But so the distinction between a spiritual problem as opposed to what you called an emotional problem, and the fact that for emotional problems there isn't really very much you can do beyond checking someone's spiritual integrity and then handing over to an emotional therapist or whatever.
Yeah.
I just wonder why you can't do anything for someone's emotional problems, because I think it's very difficult. I would imagine it's difficult to just have a very abrupt boundary between the emotional and the spiritual.
Well, the answer to that is we could, but only if time and resources were permitting. Because in order to provide a client with therapeutic input, you need to be able to establish the working relationship, the therapeutic relationship with them. And this brings us into the realm of telepathic hypnosis, which is another issue which is further down the road. This is the first step, really, clearing negative, clearing the spiritual energy field is the first step. But if we wanted to take it a stage further into the therapeutic relationship, that is possible, but the restrictions are time and money. It takes time and it would cost money to do that. If a patient was going to see a traditional therapist, they would be charged by the hour, in a consulting room, and we would have to do similar.
You know, I appreciate that. I'm just, the question I have is, if you have a client whose spiritual fields and general aura is, as far as you're concerned, perfectly okay,
Yeah.
why might they have a serious emotional problem?
Serious emotional problems are usually caused, not always, but generally speaking, by some kind of conflict within the family, or abandonment at birth or adoption. People who adopt children find that it's not all wine and roses, and they have difficulty dealing with the anger that the adopted child expresses, which is the result of being rejected by the birth parents. And that's a very, very difficult thing to deal with. And what I usually do in such cases, when I send the report off, is to advise the family to familiarise themselves with the work of Nancy Newton Verrier, who's an expert in adoption, who wrote The Primal Wound and Coming Home to Self. And this is a process that takes several years. And all I can do is give advice on where to go to look for additional help. It's a difficult.
I'm going to push it, Terry, because I just want to try and make my point, which is that if someone has a serious emotional problem,
Okay,
I would have thought that renders them very spiritually vulnerable.
it does.
And so
Yeah.
I would have thought it's highly unlikely that they would be spiritually clear if they have a serious emotional problem. So I just have a difficulty understanding how somebody could be spiritually perfectly okay and yet be suffering with an emotional problem. And it just seems strange, because I would have thought someone who's seriously emotionally challenged, whatever the reason, would be very spiritually vulnerable.
What you're asking is a very, very important question, and this is why all these cases are recorded and registered with their characteristics, so that these sort of questions can be studied and answered from the types of cases that we deal with. Generally speaking, I find that the younger the child, the fewer are the spiritual problems. You can get a 9, 10, 11-year-old child, which we've had recently, clear spiritually, but they are suffering from the emotional trauma of a broken family, say. You know, they've only got one parent and they're angry at being losing a parent. So clear distinctions can be made between spiritual and psychological or emotional. Now, if that problem is not resolved and dealt with early, and they carry on into adolescence and start taking drugs and start drinking, then they're going to attract spirits.
Yeah, that's what I'd say. It's addictions, isn't it, that then come from that normally. And then, of course, you know, if people have got a lot of emotional problems, especially if they've been sexually abused and that kind of thing, that obviously opens them up spiritually, but normally on the basis of the abuse that they do to themselves afterwards. But to try and kind of help them, one-to-one, you know, conscious counselling seems to be, you know, like the best method, really, because it needs to be a conscious thing as opposed to us tinkering around from a spiritual level. Well, I've found when I've got clients I've tried to deal with that, you know, obviously sexual abuse comes up, you know, it's very difficult to resolve that from the way that we're working without actually having sort of, you know, some sort of medical help and some type of counselling as well to actually get to the root of the problem. Because of course it's normally like direct family members, isn't it, that have done that, and if they're still with the family members, then that kind of abuse is still happening.
Absolutely, normally. Very difficult. Yeah.
So listen, thanks very much for that question, Graham. Very, very important. I've recorded that. I'm going to stop the recording now because it's going to be useful for students to study.
Sure.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.